Chapter 13 Section 1. And so he went on scolding to his den beneath, taking the candle with him, and I remained in the dark. The period of reflection succeeding this silly action compelled me to admit the necessity of smothering my pride and choking my wrath, and bestring myself to remove its effects. An unexpected aid presently appeared in the shape of Throttler, whom I now recognized as a son of our old skulker. It had spent its whelphood at the Grange, and was given by my father to Mr. Hindley. I fancy it knew me. It pushed its nose against mine by way of salute, and then hastened to devour the porridge, while I groped from step to step, collecting the shattered earthenware, and drying the spatters of milk from the banister with my pocket handkerchief. Our labors were scarcely over when I heard Earnshaw's tread in the passage. My assistant tucked his tail, and pressed to the wall. I stole into the nearest doorway. The dog's endeavor to avoid him was unsuccessful, as I guessed by a scutter downstairs, in a prolonged, piteous yelping. I had better luck. He passed on, entered his chamber, and shut the door. Directly after Joseph came up with Hareton, to put him to bed. I had found shelter in Hareton's room, and the old man, on seeing me, said, "Dash, they's ram for both you and your pride. Now, I sud think ye the house. It's empty. Ye may have it all to yourseln, on him as Alice Max or third, ye sickle company." Gladly did I take advantage of this intimation, and the minute I flung myself into a chair, by the fire, I nodded, and slept. My slumber was deep and sweet, though over far too soon. Mr. Heathcliff awoke me. He had just come in, and demanded, in his loving manner, what I was doing there. I told him the cause of my staying up so late, that he had the key of our room in his pocket. The adjective gave mortal offense. He swore it was not, nor ever should be, mine, but I'll not repeat his language, nor describe his habitual conduct. He is ingenious and unresting in seeking to gain my abhorrence. I sometimes wonder at him with an intensity that deadens my fear, yet, I assure you, a tiger or a venomous serpent could not rouse terror in me equal to that which he wakens. He told me of Catherine's illness, and accused my brother of causing it, promising that I should be Edgar's proxy in suffering, till he could get hold of him. I do hate her. I am wretched. I have been a fool. Beware of uttering one breath of this to anyone at the Grange. I shall expect you every day. Don single quote to disappoint me. Isabella. Chapter 18. As soon as I had perused this epistle, I went to the master, and informed him that his sister had arrived at the Heights, and sent me a letter expressing her sorrow for Mrs. Linton's situation, and her ardent desire to see him, with a wish that he would transmit to her, as early as possible, some token of forgiveness by me. "Forgiveness," said Linton. "I have nothing to forgive her, Ellen. You may call at Wuthering Heights this afternoon, if you like, and say that I am not angry, but I am sorry to have lost her, especially as I can never think she will be happy. It is out of the question my going to see her, however. We are eternally divided, and should she really wish to oblige me, let her persuade the villain she has married to leave the country." "And you won't write her a little note, sir?" I asked, imploringly. "No," he answered. "It is needless. My communication with Heathcliff's family shall be as sparing as his with mine. It shall not exist." Mr. Edgar's coldness depressed me exceedingly, and all the way from the Grange I puzzled my brains how to put more heart into what he said, when I repeated it, and how to soften his refusal of even a few lines to console Isabella. I dare say she had been on the watch for me since morning. I saw her looking through the lattice as I came up the garden causeway, and I nodded to her, but she drew back, as if afraid of being observed. I entered without knocking. There never was such a dreary, dismal scene as the formerly cheerful house presented. I must confess that if I had been in the young lady's place, I would, at least, have swept the hearth, and wiped the tables with a duster. But she already partook of the pervading spirit of neglect which encompassed her. Her pretty face was wan and listless, her hair uncurled, some locks hanging lankly down, and some carelessly twisted round her head. Probably she had not touched her dress since yesterday evening. Hindley was not there. Mr. Heathcliff sat at the table, turning over some papers in his pocket-book, but he rose when I appeared, asked me how I did, quite friendly, and offered me a chair. He was the only thing there that seemed decent, and I thought he never looked better. So much had circumstances altered their positions, that he would certainly have struck a stranger as a born and bred gentleman, and his wife as a thorough little slattern. She came forward eagerly to greet me, and held out one hand to take the expected letter. I shook my head. She wouldn't understand the hint, but followed me to a sideboard, where I went to lay my bonnet, and importuned me in a whisper to give her directly what I had brought. Heathcliff guessed the meaning of her manoeuvres, and said, "If you have got anything for Isabella, as no doubt you have, Nelly, give it to her. You needn't make a secret of it. We have no secrets between us." "Oh, I have nothing," I replied, thinking it best to speak the truth at once. "My master bid me tell his sister that she must not expect either a letter or a visit from him at present. He sends his love, ma'am, and his wishes for your happiness, and his pardon for the grief you have occasioned. But he thinks that after this time his household and the household here should drop into communication, as nothing could come of keeping it up." Mrs. Heathcliff's lip quivered slightly, and she returned to her seat in the window. Her husband took his stand on the hearthstone, near me, and began to put questions concerning Catherine. I told him as much as I thought proper of her illness, and he extorted from me, by cross-examination, most of the facts connected with its origin. I blamed her, as she deserved, for bringing it all on herself, and ended by hoping that he would follow Mr. Linton's example and avoid future interference with his family, for good or evil. "Mrs. Linton is now just recovering," I said. "She'll never be like she was, but her life is spared. And if you really have a regard for her, you'll shun crossing her way again. Nay, you'll move out of this country entirely, and that you may not regret it. I'll inform you Catherine Linton is as different now from your old friend Catherine Earnshaw, as that young lady is different from me. Her appearance has changed greatly, her character much more so, and the person who is compelled, of necessity, to be her companion, will only sustain his affection hereafter by the remembrance of what she once was, by common humanity, and a sense of duty." "That is quite possible," remarked Heathcliff, forcing himself to seem calm, "quite possible that your master should have nothing but common humanity and a sense of duty to fall back upon. But do you imagine that I shall leave Catherine to his duty and humanity? And can you compare my feelings respecting Catherine to his? Before you leave this house, I must exact a promise from you that you'll get me an interview with her. Consent. Her refuse, I will see her. What do you say?" "I say, Mr. Heathcliff," I replied, "you must not, you never shall, through my means. Another encounter between you and the master would kill her altogether. With your aid that may be avoided," he continued. "And should there be danger of such an event, should he be the cause of adding a single trouble more to her existence, why, I think I shall be justified in going to extremes. I wish you had sincerity enough to tell me whether Catherine would suffer greatly from his loss. The fear that she would restrains me. And there you see the distinction between our feelings. Had he been in my place, and I in his, though I hated him with a hatred that turned my life to gall, I never would have raised a hand against him. You may look incredulous, if you please. I never would have banished him from her society as long as she desired his. The moment her regard ceased, I would have torn his heart out, and drunk his blood. But, till then, if you don't believe me, you don't know me. Till then, I would have died by inches before I touched a single hair of his head. And yet, I interrupted, you have no scruples in completely ruining all hopes of her perfect restoration, by thrusting yourself into her remembrance now, when she has nearly forgotten you, and involving her in a new tumult of discord and distress. You suppose she has nearly forgotten me? He said. Oh, Nellie. You know she has not. You know as well as I do, that for every thought she spends on Linton she spends 1,000 on me. At a most miserable period of my life, I had a notion of the kind. It haunted me on my return to the neighborhood last summer. But only her own assurance could make me admit the horrible idea again. And then, Linton would be nothing, nor Henley, nor all the dreams that ever I dreamt. 2 words would comprehend my future death and hell. Existence, after losing her, would be hell. Yet I was a fool to fancy for a moment that she valued Edgar Linton's attachment more than mine. If he loved with all the powers of his puny being, he couldn't love as much in 80 years as I could in a day. And Catherine has a heart as deep as I have. The sea could be as readily contained in that horse trough as her whole affection be monopolized by him. Tush! He is scarcely a degree dearer to her than her dog, or her horse. It is not in him to be loved like me. How can she love in him what he has not? Catherine and Edgar are as fond of each other as any 2 people can be, cried Isabella, with sudden vivacity. No one has a right to talk in that manner, and I won't hear my brother depreciated in silence. Your brother's wondrous fond of you too, isn't he? Observed Heathcliff, scornfully. Single quotation turns you adrift on the world with surprising alacrity. Single quotation is not aware of what I suffer, she replied. I didn't tell him that. You have been telling him something, then. You have written, have you? To say that I was married. I did write. You saw the note. And nothing since? No. My young lady is looking sadly the worse for her change of condition, I remarked. Somebody's love comes short in her case, obviously. Whose, I may guess. But, perhaps, I shouldn't say. I should guess it was her own, said Heathcliff. She degenerates into a mere slut. She is tired of trying to please me uncommonly. You'd hardly credit it, but the very morrow of our wedding she was weeping to go home. However, she'll suit this house so much the better for not being over nice, and I'll take care she does not disgrace me by rambling abroad. Well, sir, returned I hope you'll consider that Mrs. Heathcliff is accustomed to be looked after and waited on, and that she has been brought up like an only daughter, whom everyone was ready to serve. You must let her have a maid to keep things tidy about her, and you must treat her kindly. Whatever be your notion of Mr. Edgar, you cannot doubt that she has a capacity for strong attachments, or she wouldn't have abandoned the elegancies, and comforts, and friends of her former home, to fix contentedly, in such a wilderness as this, with you. She abandoned them under a delusion, he answered, picturing in me a hero of romance, and expecting unlimited indulgences from my chivalrous devotion. I can hardly regard her in the light of a rational creature, so obstinately has she persisted in forming a fabulous notion of my character and acting on the false impressions she cherished. But, at last, I think she begins to know me. I don't perceive the silly smiles and grimaces that provoked me at first, and the senseless incapability of discerning that I was in earnest when I gave her my opinion of her infatuation and herself. It was a marvelous effort of perspicacity to discover that I did not love her. I believed, at one time, no lessons could teach her that. And yet it is poorly learned. For this morning she announced, as a piece of appalling intelligence, that I had actually succeeded in making her hate me. A positive labor of Hercules, I assure you. If it be achieved, I have cause to return thanks. Can I trust your assertion, Isabella? Are you sure you hate me? If I let you alone for half a day, won't you come sighing and wheedling to me again? I dare say she would rather I had seemed all tenderness before you. It wounds her vanity to have the truth exposed. But I don't care who knows that the passion was wholly on one side, and I never told her a lie about it. She cannot accuse me of showing one bit of deceitful softness. The first thing she saw me do, on coming out of the Grange, was hang up her little dog, and when she pleaded for it, the first words I uttered were a wish that I had the hanging of every being belonging to her, except one. Possibly she took that exception for herself. But no brutality disgusted her. I suppose she has an innate admiration in it, if only her precious person were secure from injury. Now, was it not the depth of absurdity of genuine idiocy, for that pitiful, slavish, mean-minded brat to dream that I could love her? Tell your master, Nellie, that I never, in all my life, met with such an abject thing as she is. She even disgraces the name of Linton, and I've sometimes relented, from pure lack of invention, in my experiments on what she could endure, and still creep shamefully cringing back. But tell him, also, to set his fraternal and magisterial heart at ease, that I keep strictly within the limits of the law. I have avoided, up to this period, giving her the slightest right to claim a separation, and, what's more, she'd thank nobody for dividing us. If she desired to go, she might. The nuisance of her presence outweighs the gratification to be derived from tormenting her. Mr. Heathcliff, said I, this is the talk of a madman. Your wife, most likely, is convinced you are mad, and, for that reason, she has borne with you hitherto, but now that you say she may go, she'll doubtless avail herself of the permission. You're not so bewitched, ma'am, are you, as to remain with him of your own accord? Take care, Ellen, answered Isabella, her eyes sparkling irefully. There was no misdoubting by their expression the full success of her partner's endeavors to make himself detested. Don't put faith in a single word he speaks. He's a lying fiend, a monster, and not a human being. I've been told I might leave him before, and I've made the attempt, but I dare not repeat it. Only, Ellen, promise you'll not mention a syllable of his infamous conversation to my brother or Catherine. Whatever he may pretend, he wishes to provoke Edgar to desperation. He says he has married me on purpose to obtain power over him, and he shall single quote he obtain that I'll die first. I just hope, I pray, that he may forget his diabolical prudence and kill me. The single pleasure I can imagine is to die, or to see him dead. There that will do for the present, said Heathcliff. If you're called upon in a court of law, you'll remember her language, Nellie, and take a good look at that countenance. She's near the point which would suit me. No, you're not fit to be your own guardian, Isabella, now, and I, being your legal protector, must retain you in my custody, however distasteful the obligation may be. Go upstairs. I have something to say to Ellen Dean in private. That's not the way, upstairs, I tell you. Why, this is the road upstairs, child. He seized her, and thrust her from the room, and returned muttering, I have no pity. I have no pity. The more the worms writhe, the more I yearn to crush out their entrails. It is a moral teething, and I grind with greater energy in proportion to the increase of pain. Do you understand what the word pity means? I said, hastening to resume my bonnet. Did you ever feel a touch of it in your life? Put it down, he interrupted, perceiving my intention to depart. You're not going yet. Come here now, Nellie. I must either persuade or compel you to aid me in fulfilling my determination to see Catherine, and that without delay. I swear that I meant no harm. I don't desire to cause any disturbance, or to exasperate or insult Mr. Linton. I only wish to hear from herself how she is, and why she has been ill, and to ask if anything that I could do would be of use to her. Last night I was in the Grange garden 6 hours, and I'll return there tonight. And every night I'll haunt the place, and every day, till I find an opportunity of entering. If Edgar Linton meets me, I shall not hesitate to knock him down, and give him enough to ensure his quiescence while I stay. If his servants oppose me, I shall threaten them off with these pistols. But wouldn't it be better to prevent my coming in contact with them, or their master? And you could do it so easily. I'd warn you when I came, and then you might let me in unobserved, as soon as she was alone, and watch till I departed, your conscience quite calm. You would be hindering mischief. I protested against playing the treacherous part in my employer's house, and, besides, I urged the cruelty and selfishness of his destroying Mrs. Linton's tranquility for his satisfaction. The kimono's occurrence startles her painfully, I said. She's all nerves, and she couldn't bear the surprise, I'm positive. Don't persist, sir, or else I shall be obliged to inform my master of your designs, and he will take measures to secure his house and its inmates from any such unwarrantable intrusions. In that case I'll take measures to secure you, woman, exclaimed Heathcliff. You shall not leave Wuthering Heights till tomorrow morning. It is a foolish story to assert that Catherine could not bear to see me, and as to surprising her, I don't desire it. You must prepare her. Ask her if I may come. You say she never mentions my name, and that I am never mentioned to her. To whom should she mention me if I am a forbidden topic in the house? She thinks you are all spies for her husband. Oh, I've no doubt she's in hell among you. I guess by her silence, as much as anything, what she feels. You say she is often restless and anxious-looking. Is that a proof of tranquility? You talk of her mind being unsettled. How the devil could it be otherwise in her frightful isolation, and that insipid, paltry creature attending her from duty and humanity, from pity and charity? He might as well plant an oak in a flower pot, and expect it to thrive, as imagine he can restore her to vigor in the soil of his shallow cares. Let us settle it at once. Will you stay here, and am I to fight my way to Catherine over Linton and his footman? Or will you be my friend, as you have been hitherto, and do what I request? Decide. Because there is no reason for my lingering another minute, if you persist in your stubborn ill nature. Well, Mr. Lockwood, I argued and complained, and flatly refused him 50 times. But in the long run he forced me to an agreement. I engaged to carry a letter from him to my mistress, and should she consent, I promised to let him have intelligence at Linton's next absence from home, when he might come, and get in as he was able. I wouldn't be there, and my fellow servants should be equally out of the way. Was it right or wrong? I fear it was wrong, though expedient. I thought I prevented another explosion by my compliance, and I thought, too, it might create a favorable crisis in Catherine's mental illness, and then I remembered Mr. Edgar's stern rebuke at my carrying tales, and I tried to smooth away all disputed on the subject, by affirming, with frequent iteration, that betrayal of trust, if it merited so harsh an appellation, should be the last. Notwithstanding, my journey homeward was sadder than my journey thither, and many misgivings I had, ere I could prevail on myself to put the missive into Mrs. Linton's hand. But here is Kenneth. I'll go down, and tell him how much better you are. My history is dreary, as we say, and will serve to while away another morning. dreary, and dreary. I reflected as the good woman descended to receive the doctor, and not exactly of the kind which I should have chosen to amuse me. But never mind. I'll extract wholesome medicines from Mrs. Dean's bitter herbs. And firstly, let me be aware of the fascination that lurks in Catherine Heathcliff's brilliant eyes. I should be in a curious taking if I surrendered my heart to that young person, and the daughter turned out a second edition of the mother. Chapter 15. Another week over and I am so many days nearer health, and spring. I have now heard all my neighbors' history, at different sittings, as the housekeeper could spare time from more important occupations. I will continue it in her own words, only a little condensed. She is, on the whole, a very fair narrator, and I don't think I could improve her style. In the evening, she said, the evening of my visit to the Heights, I knew, as well as if I saw him, that Mr. Heathcliff was about the place, and I shunned going out, because I still carried his letter in my pocket, and didn't want to be threatened or teased any more. I had made up my mind not to give it till my master went somewhere, as I could not guess how its receipt would affect Catherine. The consequence was, that it did not reach her before the lapse of 3 days. The 4th was Sunday, and I brought it into her room after the family were gone to church. There was a manservant left to keep the house with me, and we generally made a practice of locking the doors during the hours of service. But on that occasion the weather was so warm and pleasant that I set them wide open, and, to fulfill my engagement, as I knew who would be coming, I told my companion that the mistress wished very much for some oranges, and he must run over to the village and get a few, to be paid for on the morrow. He departed, and I went upstairs. Mrs. Linton sat in a loose white dress, with a light shawl over her shoulders, in the recess of the open window, as usual. Her thick, long hair had been partly removed at the beginning of her illness, and now she wore it simply combed in its natural tresses over her temples and neck. Her appearance was altered, as I had told Heathcliff, but when she was calm, there seemed unearthly beauty in the change. The flash of eyes had been succeeded by dreamy and melancholy softness. They no longer gave the impression of looking at the objects around her, they appeared always to gaze beyond, and far beyond you would have said out of this world. Then, the paleness of her face, its haggard aspect having vanished as she recovered flesh, and the peculiar expression rising from her mental state, though painfully suggestive of their causes, added to the touching interest which she awakened. And invariably to me, I know, and to any person who saw her, I should think her viewed more tangible proofs of convalescence, and stamped her as one doomed to decay. A book lay spread on the sill before her, and the scarcely perceptible wind fluttered its leaves at intervals. I believe Linton had laid it there, for she never endeavored to divert herself with reading, or occupation of any kind, and he would spend many an hour in trying to entice her attention to some subject which had formerly been her amusement. She was conscious of his aim, and in her better moods endured his efforts placidly, only showing their uselessness by now and then suppressing a wearied sigh, and checking him at last with the saddest of smiles and kisses. At other times, she would turn petulantly away, and hide her face in her hands, or even push him off angrily. And then he took care to let her alone, for he was certain of doing no good. The Merton chapel bells were still ringing, and the full, mellow flow of the beck in the valley came soothingly on the ear. It was a sweet substitute for the yet absent murmur of the summer foliage, which drowned that music about the grange when the trees were in leaf. At Wuthering Heights it always sounded on quiet days following a great thaw or a season of steady rain. And of Wuthering Heights Catherine was thinking as she listened, that is, if she thought to listen at all. But she had the vague, distant look I mentioned before, which expressed no recognition of material things either by ear or eye. "There's a letter for you," "Mrs. Linton," I said, gently inserting it in one hand that rested on her knee. "You must read it immediately, because it wants an answer." "Shall I break the seal?" "Single quote twice, yes," she answered, without altering the direction of her eyes. I opened it. It was very short. "No," I continued, "read it." She drew away her hand, and let it fall. I replaced it in her lap, and stood waiting till it should please her to glance down. But the movement was so long delayed that at last I resumed. "Must I read it, ma'am?" "It is from Mr. Heathcliff." There was a start and a troubled gleam of recollection, and a struggle to arrange her ideas. She lifted the letter, and seemed to peruse it. And when she came to the signature she sighed, yet still I found she had not gathered its import, for, upon my desiring to hear her reply, she merely pointed to the name, and gazed at me with mournful and questioning eagerness. "Well, he wishes to see you," said I, guessing her need of an interpreter. "He's in the garden by this time, and impatient to know what answer I shall bring." As I spoke, I observed a large dog lying on the sunny grass beneath raise its ears as if about to bark, and then smoothing them back, announced, by a wag of the tail, that someone approached whom it did not consider a stranger. Mrs. Linton bent forward, and listened breathlessly. The minute after a step traversed the hall. The open house was too tempting for Heathcliff to resist walking in. Most likely he supposed that I was inclined to shirk my promise, and so resolved to trust to his own audacity. With straining eagerness Catherine gazed towards the entrance of her chamber. He did not hit the right room directly. She motioned me to admit him, but he found it out ere I could reach the door, and in a stride or two was at her side, and had her grasped in his arms. He neither spoke nor loosed his hold for some 5 minutes, during which period he bestowed more kisses than ever he gave in his life before, I dare say, but then my mistress had kissed him first, and I plainly saw that he could hardly bear, for downright agony, the look into her face. The same conviction had stricken him as me, from the instant he beheld her, that there was no prospect of ultimate recovery there. She was fated, sure to die. "Oh, Kathy! Oh, my life! How can I bear it?" was the first sentence he uttered, in a tone that did not seek to disguise his despair. And now he stared at her so earnestly that I thought the very intensity of his gaze would bring tears into his eyes. But they burned with anguish, they did not melt. "What now?" said Catherine, leaning back, and returning his look with a suddenly clouded brow. Her humor was a mere vein for constantly varying caprices. "You and Edgar have broken my heart, Heathcliff, and you both come to bewail the deed to me, as if we were the people to be pitied. I shall not pity you, not I. You have killed me and thriven on it, I think. How strong you are! How many years do you mean to live after I am gone?" Heathcliff had knelt on one knee to embrace her. He attempted to rise, but she seized his hair, and kept him down. "I wish I could hold you," she continued, bitterly, "till we were both dead. I shouldn't care what you suffered." "I care nothing for your sufferings. Why shouldn't you suffer?" "I do. Will you forget me? Will you be happy when I am in the earth? Will you say 20 years hence, 'That's the grave of Catherine Earnshaw'? I loved her long ago, and was wretched to lose her. But it is past. I've loved many others since. My children are dearer to me than she was. And, at death, I shall not rejoice that I am going to her. I shall be sorry that I must leave them. Will you say so, Heathcliff?" "Don't torture me till I am as mad as yourself," cried he, wrenching his head free, and grinding his teeth. The two, to cool spectator, made a strange and fearful picture. Well might Catherine deem that heaven would be a land of exile to her, Unless with her mortal body she cast away her moral character also. Her present countenance had a wild vindictiveness in its white cheek, and a bloodless lip and scintillating eye, and she retained in her closed fingers a portion of the lock she had been grasping. As to her companion, while raising himself with one hand, he had taken her arm with the other, and so inadequate was his stock of gentleness to the requirements of her condition, that on his letting go I saw 4 distinct impressions left blue in the colorless skin. "Are you possessed with the devil?" he pursued, savagely, "to talk in that manner to me when you are dying? Do you reflect that all those words will be branded in my memory, and eating deeper eternally after you have left me? You know you lie to say I have killed you, and, Catherine, you know that I could as soon forget you as my existence. Is it not sufficient for your infernal selfishness, that while you are at peace I shall writhe in the torments of hell?" "I shall not be at peace," moaned Catherine, recalled to a sense of physical weakness by the violent, unequal throbbing of her heart, which beat visibly and audibly under this excessive agitation. She said nothing further till the paroxysm was over. Then she continued, more kindly, "I am not wishing you greater torment than I have, Heathcliff. I only wish us never to be parted, and should a word of mine distress you hereafter, think I feel the same distress underground, and for my own sake, forgive me. Come here and kneel down again. You never harmed me in your life. Nay, if you nurse anger, that will be worse to remember than my harsh words. Won't you come here again? Do." Heathcliff went to the back of her chair, and leant over, but not so far as to let her see his face, which was livid with emotion. She bent round to look at him. He would not permit it. Turning abruptly, he walked to the fireplace, where he stood, silent, with his back towards us. Mrs. Linton's glance followed him suspiciously. Every movement woke a new sentiment in her. After pausing a prolonged gaze, she resumed, addressing me in accents of indignant disappointment, "Oh, you see, Nelly, he would not relent a moment to keep me out of the grave. That is how I am loved. Well, never mind. That is not my Heathcliff. I shall love mine yet, and take him with me. He's in my soul. And," added she musingly, "the thing that irks me most is his shattered prison, after all. I'm tired of being enclosed here. I'm wearying to escape into that glorious world, and to be always there, not seeing it dimly through tears, and yearning for it through the walls of an aching heart, but really with it, and in it. Nelly, you think you are better and more fortunate than I, and full of health and strength. You are sorry for me very soon that will be altered. I shall be sorry for you. I shall be incomparably beyond and above you all. I wonder he won't be near me," she went on to herself. "I thought he wished it. Heathcliff, dear, you should not be sullen now. Do you come to me, Heathcliff?" In her eagerness she rose and supported herself on the arm of the chair. At the earnest appeal he turned to her, looking absolutely desperate. His eyes, wide and wet, at last flashed fiercely on her. His breast heaved convulsively. An instant they held asunder, and then how they met I hardly saw, but Catherine made a spring, and he caught her, and they were locked in an embrace from which I thought my mistress would never be released alive. In fact, to my eyes, she seemed directly insensible. He flung himself into the nearest seat, and on my approaching hurriedly to ascertain if she had fainted, he gnashed at me, and foamed like a mad dog, and gathered her to him with greedy jealousy. I did not feel as if I were in the company of a creature of my own species. It appeared that he would not understand, though I spoke to him. So I stood up, and held my tongue, in great perplexity. A movement of Catherine's relieved me a little presently. She put up her hand to clasp his neck, and bring her cheek to his as he held her, while he, in return, covering her with frantic caresses, said wildly, "You teach me now how cruel you have been, cruel and false. Why did you despise me? Why did you betray your own heart, Kathy? I have not one word of comfort. You deserve this. You have killed yourself. Yes, you may kiss me, and cry, and wring out my kisses and tears. They'll blight you, they'll damn you. You loved me, then what right had you to leave me? What right answer me for the pull fancy you have felt for Linton? Because misery and degradation, and death, and nothing that God or Satan could inflict would have parted us, you, of your own will, did it. I have not broken your heart, you have broken it, and in breaking it, you have broken mine. So much the worse for me that I am strong. Do I want to live? What kind of living will it be when you, oh, God? Would you like to live with your soul in the grave? Let me alone. Let me alone, sobbed Catherine. If I've done wrong, I'm dying for it. It is enough. You left me too, but I won't upbraid you. I forgive you. Forgive me. It is hard to forgive, and to look at those eyes, and feel those wasted hands, he answered. Kiss me again, and don't let me see your eyes. I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours. How can I? They were so let their faces hit against each other, and washed by each other's tears. At least, I suppose the weeping was on both sides, as it seemed Heathcliff could weep on a great occasion like this. I grew very uncomfortable, meanwhile, for the afternoon wore fast away. The man whom I had sent off returned from his errand, and I could distinguish, by the shine of the western sun up the valley, a concourse thickening outside Merton Chapel porch. Service is over, I announced. My master will be here in half an hour. Heathcliff groaned a curse, and strained Catherine closer. She never moved. Ere long I perceived a group of the servants passing up the road towards the kitchen wing. Mr. Linton was not far behind. He opened the gate himself and sauntered slowly up, probably enjoying the lovely afternoon that breathed as soft as summer. "No, he is here," I exclaimed. "For heaven's sake, hurry down. You'll not meet anyone on the front stairs. Do be quick, and stay among the trees till he is fairly in." "I must go, Cathy," said Heathcliff, seeking to extricate himself from his companion's arms. "But if I live, I'll see you again before you are asleep. I won't stray 5 yards from your window." "You must not go," she answered, holding him as firmly as her strength allowed. "You shall not, I tell you. For 1 hour," he pleaded earnestly. "Not for 1 minute," she replied. "I must. Linton will be up immediately," persisted the alarmed intruder. He would have risen, and unfixed her fingers by the act she clung fast, gasping. There was mad resolution in her face. "No," she shrieked. "Oh, don't go. It is the last time. Edgar will not hurt us. Heathcliff, I shall die. I shall die. Damn the fool." "There he is," cried Heathcliff, sinking back into his seat. "Hush, my darling. Hush, hush, Catherine. I'll stay. If you shot me so, I'd expire with a blessing on my lips." And there they were fast again. I heard my master mounting the stairs. The cold sweat ran from my forehead. I was horrified. "Are you going to listen to her ravings?" I said, passionately. "She does not know what she says. We ruin her, because she has not wit to help herself. Get up. You could be free instantly. That is the most diabolical deed that ever you did." We are all done for master, mistress, and servant. I wrung my hands, and cried out, and Mr. Linton hastened his step at the noise. In the midst of my agitation, I was sincerely glad to observe that Catherine's arms had fallen relaxed, and her head hung down. She's fainted, or dead, I thought, so much the better. Far better that she should be dead, than lingering a burden and a misery make her dwell about her. Edgar sprang to his unbidden guest, blanched with astonishment and rage. What he meant to do I cannot tell. However, the other stopped all demonstrations, at once, by placing the lifeless-looking form in his arms. "Look there," he said. "Unless you be a fiend, help her first, then you shall speak to me." He walked into the parlor, and sat down. Mr. Linton summoned me, and with great difficulty, and after resorting to many means, we managed to restore her to sensation. But she was all bewildered. She sighed, and moaned, and knew nobody. Edgar, in his anxiety for her, forgot her hated friend. I did not. I went, at the earliest opportunity, and besought him to depart, affirming that Catherine was better, and he should hear from me in the morning how she passed the night. "I shall not refuse to go out at doors," he answered, "but I shall stay in the garden, and, Nelly, mind you keep your word tomorrow. I shall be under those large trees. Mind. Or I'll pay another visit, whether Linton be in or not." He sent a rapid glance through the half-open door of the chamber, and, ascertaining that what I stated was apparently true, delivered the house of his luckless presence. Chapter 16. About 12 o'clock that night was born the Catherine he saw at Wuthering Heights, a puny, 7-month child, and 2 hours after the mother died, having never recovered sufficient consciousness to Miss Heathcliff, or know Edgar. The latter's distraction at his bereavement is a subject too painful to be dwelt on. Its after-effects showed how deep the sorrow sunk. A great addition, in my eyes, was his being left without an heir. I bemoaned that, as I gazed on the feeble orphan, and I mentally abused old Linton for what was only natural partiality, the securing his estate to his own daughter, instead of his son's. An unwelcomed infant it was, poor thing. It might have wailed out of life, and nobody cared a morsel, during those first hours of existence. We redeemed the neglect afterwards, but its beginning was as friendless as its end is likely to be. Next morning bright and cheerful out of doors stole softened in through the blinds of the silent room, and suffused the couch and its occupant with a mellow, tender glow. Edgar Linton had his head laid on the pillow, and his eyes shut. His young and fair features were almost as death-like as those of the form beside him, and almost as fixed, but his was a hush of exhausted anguish, and hers of perfect peace. Her brow smooth, her lids closed, her lips wearing the expression of a smile. No angel in heaven could be more beautiful than she appeared. And I partook of the infinite calm in which she lay. My mind was never in a holier frame than while I gazed on the untroubled image of divine rest. I instinctively echoed the words she had uttered a few hours before, incomparably beyond and above us all. Whether still on earth or now in heaven, her spirit is at home with God. I don't know if it be a peculiarity in me, but I am seldom otherwise than happy while watching in the chamber of death. Should no frenzied or despairing mourner share the duty with me, I see a repose that neither earth nor hell can break, and I feel an assurance of the endless and shadowless hereafter, the eternity they have entered, where life is boundless in its duration, and love in its sympathy, and joy in its fullness. I noticed on that occasion how much selfishness there is even in a love like Mr. Linton's, when he so regretted Catherine's blessed release. To be sure, one might have doubted, after the wayward and impatient existence she had led, whether she merited a haven of peace at last. One might doubt in seasons of cold reflection, but not then, in the presence of her corpse. It asserted its own tranquility, which seemed a pledge of equal quiet to its former inhabitant. Do you believe such people are happy in the other world, sir? I'd give a great deal to know. I declined answering Mrs. Dean's question, which struck me as something heterodox. She proceeded, retracing the course of Catherine Linton. I fear we have no right to think she's, but we'll leave her with her Maker. The master looked asleep, and I ventured soon after sunrise to quit the room and steal out to the pure refreshing air. The servants thought me gone to shake off the drowsiness of my protracted watch. In reality, my chief motive was seeing Mr. Heathcliff. If he had remained among the larches all night, he would have heard nothing of the stir at the Grange, unless, perhaps, he might catch the gallop of the messenger going to Merton. If he had come nearer, he would probably be aware, from the lights flitting to and fro, and the opening and shutting of the outer doors, that all was not right within. I wished, yet feared, to find him. I felt the terrible news must be told, and I longed to get it over, but how to do it I did not know. He was there at least, a few yards further in the park, leaned against an old ash tree, his hat off, and soaked with the dew that had gathered on the budded branches, and fell pattering round him. He had been standing a long time in that position, for I saw a pair of owls passing and repassing scarcely 3 feet from him, busy in building their nest, and regarding his proximity no more than that of a piece of timber. They flew off at my approach, and he raised his eyes and spoke. "She's dead," he said. "I've not waited for you to learn that. Put your handkerchief away, Don he snivelled before me. Damn you all. She wants none of your tears." I was weeping as much for him as her. We do sometimes pity creatures that have none of the feeling either for themselves or others. When I first looked into his face, I perceived that he had got intelligence of the catastrophe, and a foolish notion struck me that his heart was quelled and he prayed, because his lips moved and his gaze was bent on the ground. Yes, she's dead," I answered, checking my sobs and drying my cheeks. "Into heaven, I hope, where we may, everyone, join her, if we take due warning and leave our evil ways to follow good." "Did she take due warning, then?" asked Heathcliff, attempting a sneer. "Did she die like a saint? Come, give me a true history of the event." I did. He endeavored to pronounce the name, but could not manage it, and compressing his mouth he held a silent combat with his inward agony, defying, meanwhile, my sympathy with an unflinching, ferocious stare. "How did she die?" he resumed, at last feigned, notwithstanding his hardihood, to have a support behind him, for, after the struggle, he trembled, in spite of himself, to his very finger ends. "Poor wretch," I thought, "you have a heart and nerves the same as your brother men. Why should you be anxious to conceal them? Your pride cannot blind God. You tempt him to wring them, till he forces a cry of humiliation." "Quietly as a lamb," I answered, aloud. She drew a sigh, and stretched herself, like a child reviving, and sinking again to sleep. In 5 minutes after I felt one little pulse of her heart, and nothing more. "And did she ever mention me?" he asked, hesitating, as if he dreaded the answer to his question would introduce details that he could not bear to hear. "Her senses never returned. She recognized nobody from the time you left her," I said. "She lies with a sweet smile on her face, and her latest ideas wandered back to pleasant early days. Her life closed in a gentle dream. May she wake as kindly in the other world. May she wake in torment," he cried, with frightful vehemence, stamping his foot, and groaning in a sudden paroxysm of ungovernable passion. She's a liar to the end. Where's she? Not there, not in heaven, not perished where. Oh? You said you cared nothing for my sufferings. And I pray one prayer I repeat it till my tongue stiffens. Catherine Earnshaw, may ye not rest as long as I am living. You said I killed you, haunt me, then. The murder did haunt the murderers, I believe. I know that ghosts have wandered on earth. Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss, where I cannot find you. Oh, God. It is unutterable. I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul. He dashed his head against the knotted trunk, and, lifting up his eyes, howled, not like a man, but like a savage beast being goaded to death with knives and spears. I observed several splashes of blood about the bark of the tree, and his hand and forehead were both stained. Probably the scene I witnessed was a repetition of others acted during the night. It hardly moved my compassion, it appalled me. Still, I felt reluctant to quit him so. But the moment he recollected himself enough to notice me watching, he thundered a command for me to go, and I obeyed. He was beyond my skill to quiet our console. Mrs. Linton's funeral was appointed to take place on the Friday following her decease. Until then her coffin remained uncovered, and strewn with flowers and scented leaves, in the great drawing-room. Linton spent his days and nights there, a sleepless guardian, and a circumstance concealed from all but me. Heathcliff spent his nights, at least, outside, equally a stranger to repose. I held no communication with him. Still, I was conscious of his design to enter, if he could. And on the Tuesday, a little after dark, when my master, from sheer fatigue, had been compelled to retire a couple of hours, I went and opened one of the windows, moved by his perseverance to give him a chance of bestowing on the faded image of his idol one final adieu. He did not omit to avail himself of the opportunity, cautiously and briefly, too cautiously to betray his presence by the slightest noise. Indeed, I shouldn't have discovered that he had been there, except for the disarrangement of the drapery about the corpse's face, and for observing on the floor a curl of light hair, fastened with a silver thread, which, on examination, I ascertained to have been taken from a locket hung round Catherine's neck. Heathcliff had opened the trinket and cast out its contents, replacing them by a black locket of his own. I twisted the two, and enclosed them together. Mr. Earnshaw was, of course, invited to attend the remains of his sister to the grave. He sent no excuse, but he never came, so that, besides her husband, the mourners were wholly composed of tenants and servants. Isabella was not asked. The place of Catherine's interment, to the surprise of the villagers, was neither in the chapel under the carved monument of the Lintons, nor yet by the tombs of her own relations, outside. It was dug on a green slope in a corner of the kirkyard, where the wall is so low that heath and bilberry plants have climbed over it from the moor, and peat mold almost buries it. Her husband lies in the same spot now, and they have each a simple headstone above, and a plain grey block at their feet, to mark the graves. Chapter 17. That Friday made the last of our fine days for a month. In the evening the weather broke, the wind shifted from south to northeast, and brought rain first, and then sleet and snow. On the morrow one could hardly imagine that there had been 3 weeks of summer. The primroses and crocuses were hidden under wintry drifts. The larks were silent, the young leaves of the early trees smitten and blackened. And dreary, and chill, and dismal, that morrow did creep over. My master kept his room. I took possession of the lonely parlor, converting it into a nursery, and there I was, sitting with the moaning doll of a child laid on my knee, rocking it to and fro, and watching, Meanwhile, the still driving flakes built up the uncurtained window, when the door opened, and some person entered, out of breath and laughing. My anger was greater than my astonishment for a minute. I supposed it one of the maids, and I cried, "Have done. How dare you show your giddiness here? What would Mr. Linton say if he heard you?" "Excuse me," answered the familiar voice, "but I know Edgar is in bed, and I cannot stop myself." With it the speaker came forward to the fire, panting and holding her hand to her side. "I have run the whole way from Wuthering Heights," she continued, after a pause, "except where I've flown. I couldn't count the number of falls I've had. Oh, I'm aching all over." "Don't be alarmed. There shall be an explanation as soon as I can give it. Only just have the goodness to step out and order the carriage to take me on to Merton, and tell a servant to seek up a few clothes in my wardrobe." The intruder was Mrs. Heathcliff. She certainly seemed in a laughing predicament. Her hair streamed on her shoulders, dripping with snow and water. She was dressed in the girlish dress she commonly wore, befitting her age more than her position, a low frock with short sleeves, and nothing on either head or neck. The frock was of light silk, and clung to her with wet, and her feet were protected merely by thin slippers. Add to this a deep cut under one ear, which only the cold prevented from bleeding profusely, a white face scratched and bruised, and a frame hardly able to support itself through fatigue. And you may fancy my first fright was not much allayed when I had had leisure to examine her. "My dear young lady," I exclaimed, "I'll stir nowhere, and hear nothing, till you have removed every article of your clothes, and put on dry things. And certainly you shall not go to Merton tonight, so it is needless to order the carriage." "Certainly I shall," she said, "walking or riding, yet I've no objection to dress myself decently. And see how it flows down my neck now. The fire does make it smart." She insisted on my fulfilling her directions, before she would let me touch her, and not till after the coachman had been instructed to get ready, and a maid set to pack up some necessary attire, did I obtain her consent for binding the wound and helping to change her garments. "No, Ellen," she said, when my task was finished and she was seated in an easy chair on the hearth, with a cup of tea before her, "you sit down opposite me, and put poor Catherine's baby away. I don't like to see it. You mustn't think I care little for Catherine, because I behaved so foolishly on entering. I've cried, too, bitterly, yes, more than anyone else has reason to cry. We parted unreconciled, you remember, and I shall in single quote forgive myself. But, for all that, I was not going to sympathize with him, the brute beast. Oh, give me the poker. This is the last thing of his I have about me." She slipped the gold ring from her third finger, and threw it on the floor. "I'll smash it," she continued, striking it with childish spite, "and then I'll burn it." And she took and dropped the misused article among the coals. "There. He shall buy another, if he gets me back again. He'd be capable of coming to seek me, to tease Edgar. I dare not stay, lest the notion should possess his wicked head. And besides, Edgar has not been kind, has he? And I won't come suing for his assistance, nor will I bring him into more trouble. Necessity compelled me to seek shelter here, though, if I had not learned he was out of the way, I'd have halted in the kitchen, washed my face, warmed myself, got you to bring what I wanted, and departed again to anywhere out of the reach of my curse of that incarnate goblin. Ah, he was in such a fury. If he had caught me. It's a pity Earnshaw is not his match in strength. I wouldn't have run till I'd seen him all but demolished, had Hindley been able to do it. Well, don't talk so fast, miss," I interrupted. "You'll disorder the handkerchief I have tied around your face, and make the cut bleed again." drink your tea, and take breath, and give over laughing, laughed her sadly out of place under this roof, in an air condition. An undeniable truth, she replied. Listen to that child. It maintains a constant wail. Send it out of my hearing for an hour. I shan't single quote stay any longer. I rang the bell, and committed it to a servant's care, and then I inquired what had urged her to escape from Wuthering Heights in such an unlikely plight, and where she meant to go, as she refused to remain with us. I ought, and I wished to remain, answered she, to cheer Edgar and take care of the baby, for two things, and because the Grange is my right home. But I tell you he wouldn't let me. Do you think he could bear to see me grow fat, and Mary could bear to think that we were tranquil, and not resolve on poisoning our comfort? Now, I have the satisfaction of being sure that he detests me, to the point of its knowing him seriously to have me within earshot or eyesight. I noticed, when I enter his presence, the muscles of his countenance are involuntarily distorted into an expression of hatred, partly arising from his knowledge of the good causes I have to feel that sentiment for him, and partly from original aversion. It is strong enough to make me feel pretty certain that he would not chase me over England, supposing I contrived a clear escape, and therefore I must get quite away. I've recovered from my first desire to be killed by him. I'd rather he'd kill himself. He has extinguished my love effectually, and so I am at my ease. I can recollect yet how I loved him, and can dimly imagine that I could still be loving him, if even if he had doted on me, the devilish nature would have revealed its existence somehow,